Hello everybody, good afternoon, and welcome to Zen and the Art of 6 GHz Wi-Fi Design. This talk is inspired actually by the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, which was published originally in 1974. For those of you who are not familiar with this legendary work, it's a physical and metaphysical journey that explores the philosophical concept of quality as it relates to humanity's relationship with technology. It's a must-read, frankly, for any engineer in any field, not just wireless. And this contains my philosophical reinterpretation of this work as it relates specifically to Wi-Fi design in general and 6 GHz in particular. Quotes from the book are going to be in red italics. Now, philosophy can take a while. I only have 10 minutes, so you're getting the Cliff Notes version. So you're only going to get the conclusions. You're not going to get the journey. Sorry. If you're interested in the journey, come meet me at the bar later today and we can go through the journey. And for those of you who have managed to get to this point in your career and have managed to completely avoid philosophy, all I can say to you is, don't panic. So is Wi-Fi design an art or a science? This actually got answered by Peter's initial talk yesterday. The answer is yes. It's both an art and a science. Right? Because the life cycle of Wi-Fi is actually this dance, this very complicated dance that we do between art, right, what's qualitative, and science, which is what's quantitative, right? We gather requirements and constraints. We take qualitative requirements and constraints from the customer and we try to turn those into quantitative design metrics. We do design, right, where we're using quantitative metrics as well as qualitative guidelines in order to establish a design. We deploy and turn up those networks, right? We have very quantitative procedures for installing the design, mixed with qualitative on the fly. This is when stuff goes wrong in the field and you can't put the cable where you want it, you can't put the AP where you want it, you're kind of making decisions on the fly. Well, that's very qualitative. And there's an art to that. Anybody who's ever done a deployment like that knows what I'm talking about. And then, of course, use, right? And here, the customer comes back to that qualitative interpretation of how well the Wi-Fi is actually performing. So we need both quantitative methods as well as the qualitative art in order to produce a design of high quality. So what's the argument for science? Right? There's a lot of argument for science, right? We have the RF physics, the physics of RF, amplitude, wavelength, phase, Fresnel zone, free space path loss, all of those things that we learn in our CWNA studies. We have signal attenuation, absorption, reflection, diffraction. All of these are scientific principles. We have the protocol itself, 802.11. How does Wi-Fi work? Right? For those of you who've done your CWAP, you know the 802.11 protocol. We have computer modeling and measurement tools to help us represent this and to measure this and to plan it. Right? And then we have science, right? That indicates we know that the scientific method says there's one solution for every problem. When you go to school, right, and you're given a math problem or problem set, you're told you got to find the right answer. But in design, there's never a right answer. We know that as Wi-Fi designers and Wi-Fi engineers, right? There's never one right answer. But there are always better choices and worse choices. So what's the argument for art? Right? We have to interpret the customer's requirements and constraints. These are never stated quantitatively, right? And we, of course, talked yesterday about stupid requirements leading to stupid results, right? We also have unstated requirements, which are real and the customer doesn't state, but expects. Anybody who's ever done a building and hasn't worried about coverage in the bathrooms knows exactly what I'm talking about there. Right? What are the artistic elements when we do a Wi-Fi design? Well, I've got my choice of access point, right? What vendor do I pick? What model do I pick? Is it AC? Is it AX? Is it BE? Is it 802.11? Right? That's my choice. Right? Along with that is an antenna if it's got an external model. Right? I can pick the location. Where am I going to place the APs? There's no one right answer to where I place those APs. I may be constrained in terms of where I can place some of those APs based on the project, but there's never one right answer to that. My channel and transmit power settings, how do I balance the APs, right, in order to maximize coverage and minimize self-interference, right? I also have a whole bunch of other nerd knobs, depending on what platform I'm using, that I can use to tune basic data rates and, roaming thresholds and all of those other kind of fine things, What do we euphemistically call these? We call these best practices, right? When we design, when we take all of these choices and things into account, we define these as best practices. However, everybody's got a different interpretation of what best practices are. If we asked 3 CWNEs in this room, what are your best practices, you'll probably get 4 or 5 answers. You'll get 2 or 3 from me, depending on the situation. That's the reality of it. So what are best practices, right? That's the system of checks that we use in terms of understanding, well, what's going to work and what's not going to work in practice, not just in theory. One of the quotes from the book, one system or methodology of design is no more correct than another. It's merely what's more convenient. What may be more convenient in one setting or one vertical may be different from another. So, but how do we establish these best practices? First, we study, right? You come to conferences like this, you learn as much as you can on your own, you learn from others, take classes, get your certs, experience, right? We learn more from our mistakes than we do from our victories. Practice, 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 right? Make those mistakes. Focus. Forget about multitasking. I've never been able to multitask. Turn off the phone, turn off the email. Focus on your design. Focus on the problem at hand. Then answer the emails afterwards. And you have to care, right? This is not a 9-to-5 job. If you want to be an expert in this, you have to have gumption. You have to have passion for what you do. It has to consume you. It has to keep you up at night. It has to be the last thing you think about at night, and the first thing when you wake up in the morning is that aha moment, I know how to do this, right? Because your unconscious has been working on it overnight. You don't just clock in at 9 and clock out at 5. So, what makes a Wi-Fi design specifically good? What makes it high quality? Right? So let's talk about quality. Everybody knows what quality is, but nobody knows how to define it. As the book says, quality is what you like. Quality is scientific reality. Quality is the goal of art. Confused yet? Good. In Wi-Fi, we love to define this term quality of experience, or QoE. And I remember many previous conferences where people have gotten up here and talked about QoE. What is QoE? It's an attempt to take a qualitative concept of quality of the network and wrap it in quantitative metrics, right? What you're trying to measure is the customer's satisfaction with the Wi-Fi network. That's what you're trying to put a number on, right? But that satisfaction is a qualitative concept. So what does working actually mean to the customer? What is that quality of experience, right? Wi-Fi to most customers is a utility. They expect it to work like the electricity, like the water, like the air conditioning, right? You only hear about problems with the Wi-Fi when the network isn't working. In other words, when it has low quality. So, what does high quality mean? High quality means that it just works. One of my favorite quotes was about this. Each network has its own personality, which is described as the intuitive sum total of everything that you know and feel about that network. And having worked on many networks, I have networks that keep me up at night, and other networks that I'm very proud of. Next. All right, I did promise 6 gigahertz in the title. So let's talk about what about 6 gigahertz design specifically. The actual solution's unimportant as long as it has quality. So it's new rules for 6 gigahertz. You've been hearing some of those rules over the last day and a half. You're going to hear more over the course of the next 24 hours. But it's the same overall methodology, right? But we have some new rules, right? It's greenfield, right, which you've heard about, right? I don't have to worry about backwards compatibility. And I can actually take some advantage of some of the deterministic nature of 802.11ax, which I really can't do in 5 gigahertz. I got nice big fat channels, right? And I've got power spectral density, which means that I can actually use those channels. So it's much more practical to use larger channel widths at higher throughput. New use cases, right? You've heard about some of those: mesh backhaul, high density client devices, high bandwidth. New tools, for how do we model and measure in 6 gigahertz. In other words, we're going to establish new best practices for 6 gigahertz. So I'm going to give you my closing moment of Zen. The difference between a good Wi-Fi designer and a bad one is the ability to select good best practices from bad ones on the basis of quality. They have to care. The way you see what looks good and understand the reasons it looks good, and to be one with this goodness as work proceeds, is to cultivate an inner quietness, a peace of mind, so that that goodness can shine through. Passion for your work is the psychic gasoline that keeps the whole thing going. If you haven't got it, the network's not going to get designed. If you have got it and you know how to keep it, there's no way you can keep that network from getting designed. It's just bound to happen. And you want to know how to design the perfect network? That's easy. Make yourself perfect. And then just do what comes naturally. The real network that you're working on is a network called yourself. Namaste.